Dr. Abhishek Singhvi.
Mr. Chairman, sir, I rise to second this motion. Sir, at the outset, may I convey my apologies to this august House for being slightly late. In a lighter vein, I was misled by the accuracy of time with which the House sat today and started its business. I do apologize. Mr. Chairman, sir, the reply to the President's address is a very unique proceeding of all parliamentary democracies. It has many unique features. It is, for example, the only mandatory one without which Parliament cannot start. In fact, prior to June 1951, the mandatory nature was that you would have the President address each session before each session started. We amended it in 51 because we didn't want to trouble the President so many times in a year. In a sense, therefore, without this address and its reply, no Parliament is possible. It is, in fact, one of the most important addresses and debates in the entire calendar. There was also earlier a procedure whereby it had to start the next day after the President's address without any other business being taken up. We have also slightly amended that now. We expect it to start soon after, but not necessarily immediately. The fourth unique feature is that in many parliamentary democracies, especially those linked to the British Commonwealth system, this debate in reply to the President's motion can go up to 15 days. In Canada, the usual customary duration is 1 month. We also give, by convention, about 3 days odd. The idea is to open a channel of communication between the government and the legislature. As you know, the President is nothing else but the government as far as this particular provision of the Constitution is concerned. And any such channel of communication cannot afford to be clogged. It's a vital source of communication between the President, between the Government of India and the legislature. And as, for example, between two spouses, this clogging of this communication can lead to unnecessary problems. It is, in a sense, a review of the year gone by. It is also a trailer for the future. And finally, it is, of course, a tribute to Indian democracy that we discuss, we debate, we disagree, but it is always passed unanimously with or without amendments, and that, I think, is the strength of Indian democracy. Mr. Chairman, sir, this is a time to sit back and to express satisfaction on the achievements done. Those need to be highlighted, even if some of them are obvious. They need to be reiterated and underlined. It is also, however, a time to introspect in a non-adversarial and non-partisan manner. It is important to introspect also for nation building. It is important to be self-critical because there are always many miles to walk which remain. It is also important to be self-critical because while we applaud the glass half full, and while applauding the glass half full, we try to see that the stream of that glass half full is clear, unpolluted, pure. We also not only recognize but empathize with the glass half empty. It is most importantly, Mr. Chairman, sir, a time to dream. It is a time to dream about India and India's future, about India itself. As somebody put it, dreaming permits each and every one of us to be quietly and safely insane every night of our lives. But it is a very delectable dream to dream about India, and we have to dare to dream. May I, Mr. Chairman, sir, start by asking myself the possible virtues in a wish list of good governance. There are many wish lists of good governance. One common one from the UNDP lists the following virtues. And let us then try to examine at the kasauti of those virtues how we have acquitted ourselves thus far and how our charter for the future is going to pan out. That good governance wish list includes participation, 1, rule of law, 2, transparency, 3, responsiveness, 4, consensus orientation, 5, equity, 6, effectiveness and efficiency, 7, accountability, 8, strategic vision, 9, respect, 10, and tolerance, 11. It's not as if these are mere words. It's not as if they are to be taken for granted. And let me try, Mr. Chairman, sir, to go through some of them and to see the factual situation we are in. Let us turn to equity. Equity, which in a sense is linked also to respect and tolerance. It is very interesting, if you remember, when Lincoln gave that famous definition of democracy, by the people, for the people, and then he added a very peculiar phrase, of the people. Somebody said that by the people and for the people would have been sufficient. Why did he add of the people? To make the definition of democracy complete and holistic. And the answer is a very interesting one. Of the people is the crucial core component which signifies the co-equal ownership of democracy by each and every element of this nation. It is that element which truly we the people are involved in owning democracy, our democracy. And if I may say so, sir, the animating spirit behind this government's attempts is to fulfill and realize or actualize at least partly the of the people component of ownership of democracy by each and every one of us. That is really the true meaning of inclusive growth. That is really the true object, that when every layer of the pyramid at any level, every stakeholder is made to feel that he owns a part of the pyramid. We are, sir, in India, rightly gung-ho with the spirit of rising India, of surging India. And the spirit is good, rightly so. We are the world's second fastest growing economy after China. We have been growing at an incredible 6 to 6.5% for 27 years, year on year, average per year. For the last 4 years, we are growing at above 8%. And the Goldman Sachs report, usually a critic of India, suggests that this may achieve double-digit 10% or so in the not-too-distant future. Several reports suggest that by 2025, we will be ahead of Japan as the world's third largest economy after US and China. Any parameter, car sales, for example, are touching 80 lakhs per year. An interesting statistic by a very eminent Indian professor pointed out, he was in IIT earlier, he said in the 60s, when the IIT graduating class came out, within 2 years, the entire graduating class migrated to USA. What was the figure last year? The figure last year of the IIT graduating class was 3%, and many are coming back. It takes, in the United States, for the top 10 management schools to recruit the people who apply for jobs, it takes 2 months on an average. For the top 10 schools in India, whether IIT or MBA, it takes less than 4 hours. That is the gung-ho spirit of rising India, of surging India. But this gung-ho spirit has to be tempered. It has to be tempered by reality. The reality around us can be equally shocking, bone-numbing, mind-numbing. On an average, it fluctuates. We have 25% below the poverty line. Of course, remember, this is by our own somewhat funny definition of poverty line, $1 per day. Incidentally, I read an interesting article the other day about how this enumeration of poverty is done. If you have the surveyors going, and between last year and this year, somebody has got a fan or somebody has got a toilet made, then he's struck off the poverty line list. So there are actually people who are interested in hiding the extra toilet they have made over the last 1 year because they are scared of losing their BPL status. But let us stick to our own definition. It can never be a matter of pride for a country to have 25% or 27% below the poverty line. What is more important is that the rate of decrease is relatively small and slow. The rate of decrease has been under 1% of this poverty line, 0.8% to be precise. Whether you take the average from 93 to 2005 or you take the average from 99 to 2005, because remember, in 99 we changed our measurement of the poverty line. What is more important even is that in this overall 25% figure, it hides interstate disparity. There are states like Punjab which have had a 6% poverty, below poverty line ratio. Well, if 6% is the Punjab figure and the average is 25%, you can imagine that there is interstate disparity in a lot of other states which is well above 25%. What is more important is that there is intra-state disparity. Parts of Bihar or Chhattisgarh or Madhya Pradesh or Odisha would have rates of poverty different from their own state average. It is for this reason that the Honorable President's address speaks of inclusive growth. This is the rationale underlying that phrase. This is why we say that the 9 to 10% growth must be inclusive, of course, but it must go as much to manufacturing sides as to the service. It must, of course, go to the agricultural sector. Most importantly, it must display labor flexibility, a greater inclusion of labor-intensive activities and economies of scale. Along with this poverty, Mr. Deputy Chairman, sir, if we look at the other aspect, the true human development indicator, only one figure is enough: malnutrition. We have brought it down from 53% in the early 90s to about 39% a couple of years ago in 2005. But 39–40% of malnutrition along with 25% below poverty line cannot be a figure to let us sit back and be self-congratulatory. That is because ये आंकड़े उन लोगों के बारे में हैं, ये वे लोग हैं जो चिराग बन के जलते हैं हमारी और तुम्हारी महफिल में, लेकिन जिनके घर में कभी रोशनी नहीं होती. That is why the central government budgetary support to key sectors has been unprecedented, in particular during the UPA regime. These figures are known, but they are striking, and therefore I must point out that on these three key sectors, agriculture, health and rural development, the allocation on these three has been tripled between the 10th and the 11th five-year plan. In fact, if you add to this education, namely education, agriculture, health and rural development, these four account together rightly for over half of the 11th plan. The budget is hardly a week old. The budget maintains creditably all the significant schemes initiated by this government. Whether it is the drinking water mission, where as much as 7,300 crores have been allocated, whether it is the Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewal Mission, where the allocation has been increased from 5,500 crores to 6,900 crores, where it is the rural employment scheme, where all the districts of the country are progressively sought to be included. There are many more, and the President's address mentions them. Mr. Chairman, I am referring to those elements which have found specific mention in the Honorable President's address. Specific mention. These are, Mr. Deputy Chairman, sir, not mere acronyms. NREGA is not an acronym. It is not a mere name or a figure. It is a concept pregnant with content and with meaning. And it is a concept, as the Honorable President mentioned specifically, which relates in particular to the rural sector and to the agricultural sector. Now, of course, there is a budgetary aspect of the agricultural loan waiver, which we have all heard about. But kindly consider that this is focused mostly in respect of small and marginal farmers. These are persons who are not only honorable, but they are persons who do not practice chicanery. They do not practice deviousness in avoiding loans. They are persons who suffer on loans on account of adversity beyond their control, be it seasonal factors, be it rainfall, be it pests and insects. After they suffer adversity, they do not have clever resource persons, as many industrialists do, to prevent the realization of humongous NPAs, non-performing assets. For them, this is a real means of avoiding distress. For them, it is a real means of avoiding anxiety. And we must not also forget that many of these loans might have remained, would have caused the same anxiety and distress with not necessarily much hope of recovering, except that you might recover a suicide body or a lash in one particular case. It is this collective ownership of democracy which I submit is the underlying theme in the President's address. It is the collective ownership of the people which is the underlying theme in the budget. No tree can flower, no tree can bear fruits unless its roots are strong, unless the bottom and the lower levels of the pyramid feel involved, unless the gap and the hiatus between many Indias in one, unless that gap is closed, you cannot hope to have true growth. We are now talking of those people who can legitimately ask you the question, हमसे पूछो मिजाज बारिश का, हम हैं कच्चे मकान वाले. These are therefore virtuous components of equity, of participation, of transparency. There is another in the list I gave, the UNDP wish list of good governance, and that is rule of law. Rule of law, we must ask ourselves the question, why is it that India is perhaps the only country which has emerged from the yoke of imperialism in the 50s, perhaps the only country, I repeat, not in Asia, not in Africa, not in South America, not a single other example, emerged from the yoke of imperialism with the size and scope of poverty and other problems which we have, which has been a vibrant democracy, unaffected by the wrecks and the ruins of constitutionalism which litter the constitutional landscape of the whole of South and Southeast Asia. Why is that? One important reason is because we have rule of law in this country, and therefore we have to do everything possible to strengthen that rule of law, that concept. It is good that the budget recently has increased the planned allocation to the judiciary. But there are several issues where many more miles need to be walked. The allocations have to be increased even more. More importantly, the number of judges, where the India average is running at about 12 or 13 judges per million of population. The global average is above 40. There is a Supreme Court order which says that the judges per million population in this country should be at least 50 judges per million of population. Well, for that, we need to increase judicial outlays dramatically. Let me give you a simple example. We have court fees levied by most states. Well, the court fees, although it is described as a fee and not a tax, must be an earmarked amount which must go directly into the judicial kitty. In actual fact, that does not happen. There are several other reforms. For example, why should there be a distinction in the age of retirement between High Court and Apex Court judges? A High Court judge need not leave at 62, leaving you running and scrambling to make more appointments, whereas a Supreme Court judge goes on to 65, Both ages are significantly less than the global average of 75 or 70. It is startling that right from independence till today, two statistics stand out. There are roughly 700 High Court judges all over the country if you add all the states on an average for the last 50, 60 years. In that 700, at any point of time, 150 odd seats, judicial seats, have remained vacant. How can you uphold the rule of law if 150 out of 700 High Court judges for a country of this size are always at any point of time vacant? Interestingly, the total figure of the lower court judicial officers is 14,412, the total figure. 25% of this, that is 1/4 of this similarly, has always remained vacant at any point of time over the last 50 years. Well, you cannot treat patients if you have hospitals but do not have doctors. You cannot uphold the rule of law unless you dramatically address the resource crunch in this sector. Friends, the third aspect, or rather a fourth aspect, which the Honorable President touched upon was security or internal security. There cannot be a doubt that a major threat to democracy is the threat of terrorism, the threats to internal security. We cannot be complacent about it, and we cannot and should not be self-congratulatory. But equally, Mr. Deputy Chairman, sir, we cannot be constantly bickering on this front. We cannot make the threat of internal security by our constant apprehensions and accusations into a self-fulfilling prophecy. We cannot create a fear psychosis or a climate of insecurity, not for political reasons, but because it weakens our national resolve. Since law and order is a state subject, since defense and external security is a national subject, central subject, internal security is a strange hybrid which finds, interestingly, not any mention in the Constitution of India. It is an intermediate concept. It is a concept which is very important, but which has to be addressed jointly by the joint efforts of the state governments and the central. Finger pointing is no point. It doesn't solve problems. When states ask for assistance, the central government is duty bound to do it and has frequently done it. It is also important not to run away from figures and merely cast arguments on the basis of fear or insecurity. There is a problem of Naxalism, but to suggest that 1/3 of the country is taken over by Naxalism is to create a feeling that India has ceded territory to Naxals. It's very interesting, and I checked up on this in the internal security debate of this August House earlier, that if even one district, if even one village or one police post in a district is found to be affected by Naxalism, the whole district is declared to be Naxal affected. On that basis, it is said that 1/3 of the districts of this country are Naxal affected. The more accurate, Mr. Chairman, sir, if I may humbly submit, the more accurate way of looking at it is that there are 14,000 police posts in this whole country. 14,000. And do you know how many of these police posts are affected by Naxalism? 300. That is less than 2%. So we must have a resolve to combat it. We must crush them. We must attack them. We must meet them. We must rehabilitate them. But we must not necessarily give figures or arguments which are A, not entirely accurate, and B, create a misleading psychosis or ambience or psychology, or a defeatist one. Similarly, the fact of the matter is that Naxalism has now come to be concentrated in the last few years in 3 major areas of this country. It is not to say that we must not reinforce and strengthen the resolve of those 3 states. It is not to allocate political color to those states. But the fact of the matter is that everything has to be done in respect of those 3 states, Chhattisgarh, Odisha and Jharkhand, because the figures are encouraging in one sense. There is a 70% reduction in Andhra Pradesh, 70. Incidentally, If there are messengers of doom on any such issue, the reduction in terrorist figures in Jammu and Kashmir also, friends, whether we like to say it or not, is 70%, 70. These are published figures. These are figures which we don't have to merely tom-tom, but they are also figures which must stop us from doing breastbeating of an unnecessary nature. Mr. Deputy Chairman, sir, a fifth aspect, transparency and accountability. Yet another of those two virtues in the good governance wish list. If I may say so, sir, humbly, there are very few governments which have trod the path of these two virtues more assiduously, more sincerely, more doggedly than this government. The RTI is the single most outstanding example, and not only the Right to Information Act by itself, but its real operationalization. There are teething problems. There are adjudicatory dialectics, but a balance is going to be achieved shortly because these are now in operation in every department. There are hardly any sacred or holy cows from which are immune from the RTI Act. Accountability is not only, although it's an important part of it, a war on corruption. Accountability is, of course, to deal with corruption, which is very important, an issue which we sometimes forget to mention, but it is much more than that. It is a paradigm of good governance itself, and it is a paradigm which must travel downwards. By downwards, I mean that today the reality, good, bad, or indifferent, is that the central government proposes, but the state government disposes. Today, the central government may decide, may conceptualize, may initiate, may offer, may contribute, but it is the state government which disposes, which operationalizes, which implements. That is true in 90% of issues. That is a paradigm which is good for our federalism. Incidentally, our framers created a constitution which was heavily centripetal, biased towards the center. That's why it was called not truly federal, but it was called quasi-federal. It's very interesting. In actual reality, we are today much more federal in operational, whether because of regionalism, whether because of regional parties, whether because of coalitions, whether because of decentralization, whether because of Panchayati Raj, so many things. Well, one aspect of that is that good governance is no point being talked about at the central level unless it is done at the state level. Take, for example, the NREGA, a concept which it is easy to poo-poo for political reasons, but it is as innovative, as dramatic, and as focused towards public welfare as, for example, the loan waiver recently. But ultimately, the NREGA must depend on that good governance paradigm at the state level. Of course, the center must step forward and do fine-tuning every few months, every few weeks. It is interesting that recently, last week, a group of young MPs of the Congress party, several of them met the Honorable Prime Minister, who is present in this august house, and made constructive suggestions about fine-tuning NREGA. The most important aspect of that fine-tuning is to institutionalize a monitoring mechanism, institutionalize a auditing mechanism. These are constructive suggestions on which not only the center but the states have to collaborate. And it is a suggestion, or it is a series of suggestions without which we will not be able to get the best benefits out of such remarkably innovative and novel schemes. Mr. Chairman, sir, there is a sixth aspect of channeling youth power. And may I link that aspect of channeling youth power with the related concepts of what we now call, two new phrases we have, demographic dividend and India's soft power. It is, I remember for all these years, the one thing we would all catch our head on and sit and lament as our nightmare was our population problem. It is a unique achievement of this millennium that for the first time we do not talk of a population problem. That should not mean that we should not address population control, but it means that for the first time in the history of Indian independence, a supposed population problem has turned into a demographic dividend. And we have, therefore, the largest percentage of youth below 50 in the world, in the country. We are far ahead of China. We will remain far ahead of China till the 2050s. Our productivity is the highest. The dependency ratio, which experts call, of the profile of population, namely the dependency of the old population on the not old population, is the best in India. Well, then the time has come for the government to find a way of utilizing this youth power. A lot of these schemes, a number of them have been listed in the Honorable President's address, require the monitoring skills, the sincerity and the idealism, A, of the youth, and B, if I may say so, one must consider utilizing the ex-servicemen cadre of this country. A huge cadre which is available, relatively free from the ills of bad governance, but ideal for using as a monitoring, as a checking mechanism which is required for so many schemes. But to that, Mr. Chairman, sir, we must add India's soft power. A Harvard professor, Robert Fisk, was prescient and prophetic because he wrote more than 10 years ago, or 8 years ago, about India's soft power. And that power 8 years ago has increased so dramatically now. Because don't forget that the America of the 60s and the 70s also rode outwards on its soft power. And Hollywood was the basic beachhead of that soft power. Well, we are proud in India to not only have Bollywood, far larger than Hollywood, but we have Indian music, Indian food, Indian dress, Indian habit, Indian culture, Indian spirituality, Indian smells, Indian sound, Indian sight, Indian tourism. This is the package which is India's soft power, which led Robert Fisk 8 years ago to remark that India is like a hard fist in a velvet glove. The velvet glove is the external soft power. But I am mentioning this to implore that soft power beachhead must be used by the government and by the opposition to build a beachhead, to build an intrusive, penetrating landmark on the basis of that soft power to use our hard economic power subsequently. This soft power gives us an opening. It gives us an initial advantage which many other competitors of ours lack. And this is an aspect which no doubt the government will take into account. Mr. Deputy Chairman, sir, the government has, amongst many other schemes, also, after many decades, set up an Administrative Reforms Commission. We have now 6 reports of that. One particular report has to be looked at in particular. This is not to say that the others should not. And that is the report on ethics in government. This is not again some slogan or shibboleth. This should not remain a sacred cow in our quest for reform. We should take up some of the recommendations in this. There is a dictionary, there are 2 dictionaries. One is the Devil's Dictionary, which sometimes you must consult, which gives interesting, ironic meanings, but there is also a Doubter's Dictionary. A Doubter's Dictionary defines ethics, and I quote, ethics as a matter of daily practical concern described glowingly in commercial terms by those who intend to ignore it. Well, it is for that reason that the government sets up a committee like this. It is for that reason that you require legal mechanisms to enforce such recommendations and not rely merely on our individual and collective consciences or our individual and collective good sense, because history teaches us that ethics is frequently for the man in front and not for yourself. Otherwise, if I may say in a lighter vein, committees set up, and I'm saying this entirely in a lighter vein with your permission, Mr. Chairman, would resemble my favorite definition of a committee, a group of the unfit appointed by the unwilling to do the unnecessary. Mr. Chairman, sir, may I now conclude? You've been very kind in giving me sufficient time. In conclusion, may I say that as a US president said many, many decades ago, he said, yesterday is not ours to recover, but tomorrow is ours to win or lose. A reply to the motion by the President, a reply motion to the address by the President is an occasion in particular to look to the tomorrow, but not only look, to ask ourselves, are we doing enough to win it or to lose it? We have to plan for the great leap of a rising and a surging India. As you know, when the chasm between different Indias in one is very large, when any high or chasm is very large, you can't cross it in two leaps. You have to take one big leap. So we have to be ready collectively for that leap, for a high leap, for a big leap. Our country is large, our problems are large, but ultimately it is our attitude which will determine how well we leap. As somebody said, attitude and not aptitude determines altitude, how high you soar. May I, Mr. Chairman, sir, in conclusion say that India and this Parliament and this government will not mind and should not mind to face the accusation of having tried and failed. What is important is to prevent the accusation that we failed to try. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The House is adjourned for